private dining room upstairs had 12 people in it, and one of them was always going to be me. That was the arrangement. The Williams family Christmas dinner occupied the same table at the same restaurant every December. And every December I drove my 8-year-old Civic down River Street and found parking 2 blocks over because the lot filled up early. And every December I sat in the chair nearest the door and ate my food and said the things that were expected of me and drove home afterward. My father stood up before dessert, which was earlier than usual. He had a way of standing at dinners that communicated the performance was starting. Shoulders back, glass raised, the particular expression of a man who has rehearsed informality so many times it had calcified into a kind of theater. He said some things about family and the year and being grateful, which were all true in the way that weather is true, present, and impersonal. Then he looked at me. "And then there's Renee," he said, which got the first laugh because the pause before my name was calibrated. "Still living small, still driving that car, still doing," he waved a hand, "whatever it is you do in that office." The table laughed. My mother laughed first and loudest, which was how it always worked. Douglas signaled that the water was safe and Gail was the first one in. Chad said something about how at least I wasn't a burden on anyone, which landed as a compliment only if you had never spent a significant amount of time thinking about the difference between a compliment and a management strategy. Brooke covered her mouth with her fingers, which I had watched her do for 29 years when something happened that she wanted to seem uncomfortable about without actually being uncomfortable. My aunt, seated at the far end, smiled down at her plate. I finished cutting my chicken. It was a small cut, precise, unnecessary. The piece was already bite-sized. But I finished it. Then I set the knife down on the rim of my plate and I looked at my father and then around the table. "You'll all be asking for my forgiveness by New Year's," I said. Nobody heard the sentence as a threat. That was fine. I said it at the same volume I would have said "pass the butter," which was intentional, and then I picked up my fork and finished eating while the laughter settled back into conversation around me. I left during the coat retrieval shuffle. No scene, no goodbye that required acknowledgement. I had learned a long time ago that the exits nobody witnesses are the ones that don't cost you anything. My apartment was on the second floor above a closed print shop in Thomas Square. It was small and it was quiet and it faced east, which meant the mornings were good. I had lived there for 3 years and I had spent most of those 3 years being asked, by my family, why I hadn't found something nicer, something with a lobby, something that reflected better on the family name. I had given them different answers at different times, and none of them were the real one, which was that I had been depositing a specific amount into a separate account every month for 6 years, and I did not intend to spend $1 of it on a lobby. I sat at the kitchen table at 11:15 on Christmas night with my laptop open and 3 folders on the screen in front of me. The folders had been there for 8 months. I had opened them and closed them 6 times in those 8 months, and each time I had closed them again I had told myself the same thing, that they were family, that the lease violations were manageable, that Gerald could handle the routine issues without a formal review, that there was a version of this situation in which nobody had to know what I knew. I sat at the table for a while without clicking anything. Then I opened the tenant review file for the first time. Stonefield Property Holdings, LLC had acquired Harrogate Wharf 14 months ago through a private sale that had moved quietly through channels my family had no reason to monitor. The building was 3 stories of aging Savannah brick on a narrow commercial street behind the River Street restaurants, and it housed my father's seafood kitchen operation in the basement and rear, Brooks' event planning studio on the 2nd floor, and a storage arrangement that Chad had negotiated informally with my father 4 years back that had since expanded, without anyone filing the appropriate paperwork, into a catering operation with its own client events and its own power draw. I had read those leases the week after the acquisition closed. I had made notes in the margin and put the notes in a folder and filed the folder and gone to work every day and said nothing. Gerald Fitch had been managing the property under the LLC since the beginning. He was a practical man with 22 years in Savannah commercial real estate, and a very specific expression he wore when tenants called him with creative interpretations of their lease language. He had flagged every violation, and I had told him, each time, to send the standard notice and hold for my instruction. He had sent the notices. I had not given the instruction. I gave it now. I called Gerald at 11:45 on Christmas night, and I told him I wanted a full formal compliance review of all 3 units at Harrogate Wharf, beginning the first business day after the holiday, with standard notice periods applied and no exceptions for any tenant regardless of their relationship to the property owner. I heard him set something down on a hard surface. "All 3, he said. "All 3. He said he would have the review packet to me by the 27th. I closed my laptop and washed my glass and went to bed. The violations were not complicated. They were the ordinary violations of tenants who had never expected to be held to their paperwork because they believed the paperwork was a formality and the building was, in some way that had never been legally established, theirs. My father had sublet freezer space in the basement to a restaurant 2 blocks over without written consent from the landlord, which was a breach of Section 7.2 of his lease agreement and exposed Stonefield to liability it had not agreed to absorb. The rent for that sublease was going directly to my father. It had been going to him for 11 months. Brooke had 3 outstanding utility reimbursements dating back to March. The lease was explicit about payment terms and explicit about penalty accrual. I had found, through a 30-minute review of her business's public-facing social accounts, 14 posts advertising luxury client events in the studio space, events with photographer credits and catering invoices visible in background detail, during a period in which she had submitted 2 written requests to Stonefield claiming the studio was barely covering its costs and asking for a rent reduction. The requests were in Gerald's file. The posts were not going anywhere. Chad's violations were a different category of problem. He had removed a load-bearing partition wall in the 3rd-floor space without a structural permit, without notifying the property manager, and without filing anything with the city. He had run new electrical work, also unpermitted, to support the catering equipment he was operating in a space that was not permitted for food service. He had hosted private events with alcohol service without the insurance rider that his lease explicitly required before any event revenue could be generated on the premises. Gerald had sent the standard notice in October about the insurance rider. Chad had not responded. I had the original lease Chad signed. I had Gerald's violation notices. I had the city permit database, which is public record and takes about 4 minutes to search. I called Sylvia Crane on the 27th and told her I was moving forward on formal review and that I needed her available through the New Year inspection. She said she had cleared the week. She asked if I wanted her present at the inspection itself, and I said yes. The calls started on the 28th. None of them were from Renee Williams, because none of them understood that Renee Williams had anything to do with the situation. They called Gerald. Gerald referred them to the property manager's formal review process, which is to say he directed them to the letter he had already sent, which contained the violation descriptions, the relevant lease clauses, the cure timeline, and the contact information for Stonefield Property Holdings, LLC. The contact information for Stonefield Property Holdings, LLC was a mailing address in Sylvia's firm. My father called me on the 29th. He said there was a situation with the building, and he needed me to use my professional contacts to help him find out who the landlord was, because the management company wasn't giving out that information, and the family needed to know who they were dealing with. He said this the way he said most things, as though the request were self-evidently reasonable, and the only question was the logistics of compliance. I told him I didn't have contacts in property management outside of my direct work. I told him to read his lease. I told him the violation notice would contain everything the tenant needed to know about the process. He said the notice was absurd and the timing was suspicious, and clearly someone had it out for the family. I said I hoped it got resolved. We got off the phone. My mother called on the 30th. She said the landlord was making the family suffer. She used that word, suffer. She said Christmas must have gotten someone's feathers ruffled and that the family had always had a good relationship with this building, and it was very unfair that some faceless LLC was treating them this way. She asked if I knew anyone in city code enforcement. I said I didn't. She said she was sorry if the dinner had been a little much. I said I had to get back to work. Brooke texted asking if I knew a real estate attorney who worked cheap. I texted back the number for the Savannah Bar Association referral line. Chad submitted his response to the violations on the 30th. I know the date because Sylvia forwarded it to me the same afternoon with a message that said only, "Call me when you can." I called her from my car in the parking garage. The document Chad had submitted was a typed letter on plain paper, 3 paragraphs long, asserting that the tenant's long-standing use of the space had been established by prior oral agreement with the property's previous ownership and was further evidenced by a written confirmation he was attaching. The attachment was a single page, a scanned letter bearing the signature of my grandmother, Dorothy Williams, who had died 4 years ago, and who had, in fact, owned the building before my father brokered what he believed was the sale to a development group, but which had, through a chain I will not detail here because Sylvia asked me not to, eventually reached me. I looked at the signature for a long time. My grandmother had a particular signature. She had learned to write in the 1950s from a nun with very strong opinions about penmanship, and she had signed every birthday card she ever sent me with the same hand, a capital D that looped back on itself, a small gap before the O, and a Y that dropped straight down instead of curling under. It was the kind of detail that means nothing to anyone who has not opened 40 years of birthday cards. I had opened 40 years of birthday cards. The signature on the document curled. I went upstairs and found the shoe box on the shelf in the bedroom closet. I took out the most recent birthday card, which was the last one she ever sent, which I kept because of the sentence she had written inside it. I photographed the signature on the card, and I sent it to Sylvia with no message. Sylvia replied 4 minutes later, "Do not discuss this with your family." I put the card back in the shoebox, and I put the shoebox back on the shelf. New Year's Eve fell on a Thursday that year. The inspection was scheduled for 10 in the morning. I dressed for a closing meeting, dark jacket, flat shoes appropriate for an unheated building, and I drove to Harrogate Wharf and parked behind Gerald's truck. The harbor sky was the color of old concrete. There were gulls working the dock line 2 streets over. The salt smell was strong, the way it gets in winter when the wind comes straight off the water and there is nothing warm enough to compete with it. My family was already there. They were clustered on the sidewalk in front of the building's main entrance, my father on his phone, Brooke with her arms crossed holding her own elbows, Chad standing slightly apart in the posture of a man who has decided the best strategy is to perform certainty until something better presents itself. My mother was not there, which surprised me and then did not. My aunt from Christmas dinner was there, which I had not expected. None of them looked at me when I walked up because I was Renee, and Renee had no relevance to this situation. Gerald came around the side of the building with the city inspector and the inspection packet in a manila folder. He was a precise man in his movement, and he did not vary his routine based on the audience. He walked to the front of the small group, confirmed the inspector's credentials with the inspector, and then turned to the assembled tenants and said, "I'll need to introduce the property owner, who is present today." He said my name. The way my father heard my name take on a different meaning than it had ever had before in his presence, I watched that happen in about 4 seconds. He repeated my name back as a question, not an accusation yet, not comprehension yet, just my name, inflected upward, which was the only question he had left. "I own Stonefield Property Holdings," I said. "Stonefield owns Harrogate Wharf." Chad said that was impossible given my apartment. He said it loudly, and with the confidence of a man who has confused property ownership with the visible performance of property ownership. Sylvia, who had come around the corner behind me, told him very pleasantly that she represented the property owner and any questions about the ownership structure could be directed through her office after the inspection was complete. Brooke started crying. The tears were real, I am not able to say what they were for." My father did not say anything else. He put his phone in his coat pocket and he looked at the building, and then he looked at me, and the expression on his face was not anger and it was not grief. It was the expression of a man recalculating something he had been calculating wrong for a very long time. His authority did not leave him loudly. It left the way heat leaves a building, gradually, through every unsealed gap, until you realize the room is cold. The inspection took 2 hours. The city inspector documented the removed partition wall, the unpermitted electrical installation, the absence of a food service permit for the space Chad was operating, and the missing insurance rider for the events he had hosted. Gerald documented Brooke's outstanding utility reimbursements and the gap between her stated financials and her documented client activity. My father's unauthorized sublease was already in the formal record from Gerald's prior notice, with the supporting documentation Stonefield had compiled. The rear kitchen access was restricted pending structural review of the area adjacent to Chad's wall removal. Chad's event operation was suspended immediately. Brooke's studio received a 30-day cure notice for the utility payments and a directive to cease client events until the financial documentation discrepancy was resolved. None of it was loud. All of it was in writing by noon. My family stood on the sidewalk when it was over. I did not stop to speak with them. Sylvia walked with me to my car, and we sat for a few minutes reviewing the inspection summary, and I told her to proceed with the forged document through whatever channel she felt was appropriate, and she said she already had a plan. I told her I was available through the holiday weekend. She said she would be in touch. I drove back to Thomas Square and made lunch and sat at my kitchen table and looked at the east-facing window for a while. The afternoon light was good. It usually was. The terms I conveyed through Sylvia in the first week of January were not complicated. All outstanding lease violations corrected at the tenant's expense within 30 days. All outstanding financial obligations, the utility reimbursements, the sublease revenue that had bypassed Stonefield, the penalty accruals paid in full within 15 days. All future communication regarding the property conducted through counsel. The forged document matter explained through counsel, with the explanation to be sufficient, or the matter would proceed through other channels. And no one in my family was to speak to me the way they had spoken to me at that Christmas dinner again. I did not make this last condition legal. I made it personal, and I delivered it in a separate message through Sylvia, addressed to each of them by name, in plain language. They paid. They corrected. They apologized, which is the word for what they did, though the word is doing some work. My mother posted something on her social page about how words have weight and families should protect each other, which was true and was also a way of apologizing to her followers for something she did not name. Brooke called me. She said she was embarrassed and that she had not understood how much she had taken for granted and that she was sorry she had laughed. I did not say you're forgiven because I was not certain that was true yet, and I did not believe in stating uncertain things to make the other person comfortable. I said thank you for calling, and I meant it. My father signed the ownership confirmation paperwork through Sylvia's office without commentary. Chad's letter, when it came, began with a clause about how he had not intended any harm. Sylvia advised me I did not have to respond to it. I did not respond to it. The forged document matter was resolved in a way that did not involve me directly, and that I will not describe here except to say that Sylvia is very good at her work, and that Chad spent 2 weeks in February doing something unpleasant and expensive that was not criminal, but was not comfortable either. I went back to the office in January and did my work and ate lunch with Myra on Tuesdays and Thursdays the way I always had. Myra knew what had happened because she had been the one who talked me through the acquisition 14 months earlier, listening over takeout containers while I explained the chain of title and what I was planning to do with it. She had not told me whether it was right or wrong. She had asked, once, whether I was building something or burning something down, and I had thought about the question for 3 days before I answered. Both, I had said finally. She had nodded like that was the honest answer. 6 months after the inspection, I renovated the second floor of Harrogate Wharf. I took the space Brooke had been using for client events. She had downsized to the smaller studio unit on the first floor, which was permitted and appropriate and fully documented, and I put in a proper office with a working closet and a coat rack and a window that faced the water. I painted it the color of the wall in my grandmother's kitchen, which was a pale green that doesn't have an official name, but which I could have picked out of a lineup anywhere. I framed one sentence on the wall above my desk. It was from the last birthday card my grandmother ever sent me, the card from the shoebox. She had written a number of things in that card, which she always did, because she believed in using cards to say things you had been saving up. But there was one sentence that I had come back to so many times in the years since she died that the paper had softened along the fold where I opened it. I am not going to reproduce the sentence here. It was hers, and it was addressed to me, and I am keeping it that way. I sat in my new office on the day the frame went up, in the chair I had bought at the estate sale 3 blocks over, with the window open because it was late June, and the harbor smell was different in summer, salt and green and boat fuel, and something warm underneath it all that was specific to Savannah in the way that specific things are specific. Not transferable, not reproducible, just exactly what it was. I had a lease review on my desk. I had a call with Gerald at 2 o'clock. I had lunch with Myra on Thursday. I opened the file and I went to work.